And we're back with the politics lead. In less than 48 hours, President Donald Trump could become just the third president in American history to be impeached by the House of Representatives, which would set up a Senate trial in January. Joining me now to discuss is Republican Congressman Mike Johnson of Louisiana. He serves on the House Judiciary Committee. Congressman, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it. So, former Republican Governor Tom Ridge, who was the first Homeland Security Secretary for George W. Bush, he said recently, quote, "I am disappointed and troubled by the very fact that my president, and he is my president, would ask a foreign leader of a troubled country who's been besieged by an enemy of the United States to do him a political favor. As far as I'm concerned, it is abuse of power." So I know you disagree with him. How is he wrong? How is it not abuse of power?
I would tell Tom Ridge and anybody else that they can't look at this in isolation. You have to look at the full context. And of course, what matters here is the actual record. The president didn't ask for Zelensky to do him a favor. He said, do us a favor. And that's a very important word. It was obscured a number of times in the judiciary hearing, the 14-hour marathon hearing we had. We had to correct the record over and over. The context is that he was making sure that the precious treasure of American taxpayers was not to be misspent overseas. And that full context is that Ukraine is widely regarded to be the third most corrupt nation in the world. So he wanted to make sure that this would be done right, that if Zelensky, who ran as a swamp drainer, so to speak, in Ukraine, to clean up the corruption, if he was really legitimate. And ultimately, the president concluded that he was, and then the aid was released.
So, all right, just so we're clear, though, this would set a precedent where a president with some sort of preceding information could be okay, it would be okay with you, with that president, a Democratic president even, asking a foreign leader to investigate a domestic political rival. No. Elizabeth Warren says, hey, China, the Kushners, there's questions about their dealings with visas.
Yeah.
Or, hey, Azerbaijan, there's questions about the Trump Tower there. Hey, Turkey, there's questions about the Trump Tower there. As long as there's some sort of predicate, that's okay with you.
No, that's not what I said. I said you have to look at the whole context. And in this context...
But there's corruption in Turkey and Azerbaijan and China.
There is, but specifically what the president was talking about is not getting dirt on his political rival for 2020. That never came up in any of these conversations.
He said Joe Biden.
He said Joe Biden, but he's referring to the events of 2016, which he's always been bothered by, and everybody can see the record of it because he tweets about it all the time. Yeah, for years, he's been talking about his concern about the 2016 elections.
He never said anything about Joe Biden when he was running as a candidate. He never said anything. I mean, Hunter Biden took that contract with Burisma in 2014.
Right.
The first time we hear President Trump talk about this is like last year.
Well, you haven't seen the transcripts of all his calls either. I mean, he's been concerned and has talked about it consistently about how he feels like the election was, there was meddling, there was an effort by foreigners to go against him. Everybody thought 2016 was messed up on both sides of the aisle. That's what was in his mind. And you know, as a lawyer, we've got to look at the mens rea, the intent behind the supposed offender. What was in President Trump's mind? And I think the transcript is very clear, and I think the evidence has come out since shows Zelensky said very clearly he didn't feel any pressure. There was no pressure that he felt. They didn't even know that the aid was being delivered.
That's not true. It came out in testimony. A Pentagon official said on July 25th they got a message from the Ukrainians, where is the military aid?
Right.
July 25th, the same day as the phone call.
But which Ukrainians? You got to remember
the government. The government of Ukraine.
Yeah, the deep state in Ukraine, okay? This is not...
just the government of Ukraine wanted to know where the aid was.
The fact is, Zelensky was a reformer who came in. He was kind of railing against the establishment in Ukraine. They have their own set of circumstances like we do. And there were some people within, this is our understanding from the transcript and the evidence, there were some people within the administration who didn't necessarily have Zelensky's best interest in mind because he was going to drain the swamp. All those details are important. You have to look at the facts and not little bits of it in isolation. It's the whole record that's important.
I guess one of the questions is, President Trump took office in January 2017, and at no point did he pressure, that we know of, did he pressure President Poroshenko, then the president of Ukraine. Throughout 2018, doesn't pressure Poroshenko. All of a sudden, Joe Biden announces that he's running for president in April of this year, and then in July, he's pressuring Ukraine to look. And look, let's run this down, because it is specific to the Ukrainians. It's not about, I want you to get rid of corruption. Any Americans, this is President Trump on October 3rd asked, what did you want from Zelensky in that phone call? Let's just run that sound.
I would think that if they were honest about it, they'd start a major investigation into the Bidens. It's a very simple answer.
It's not an investigation into Burisma. It's not an investigation into corruption. It's an investigation into Biden, the leading Democratic candidate running against him.
Yeah, in that clip, it is. But again, what's the full context? Now, look, we can go back through all of the president's tweets over the last... Since before he ran for president, his priority is America first. And what he has meant by that, he's articulated so many times since, is he wants to make sure that we're not squandering our dollars overseas. He's worried about NATO partners not doing their fair share, as he says. He doesn't want our taxpayer dollars being squandered. He sees Ukraine as the number three most corrupt nation in the world. And he knows that the Bidens have a lot. There's something really fishy about that Burisma thing, and everybody objectively has to acknowledge that.
There's so many countries full of corruption, and we've never heard President Trump talk about any of them. Netanyahu in Israel, he's in trouble with the law there, literally. Egypt, billions of dollars going to Egypt. Al-Sisi, an incredibly corrupt government. China, Saudi Arabia. I mean, the list goes on. And you're asking us to believe that this is a man who's really concerned about corruption abroad. And not only that, let me ask you this. When you look at President Trump right now, his former campaign chairman, Paul Manafort, his former national security advisor, Mike Flynn, his former deputy campaign chair, Rick Gates, his former associate, George Papadopoulos, his former campaign advisor, Roger Stone, all of them have been convicted of federal crimes. In addition, Trump University settled a $25 million fraud lawsuit last year. Last month, President Trump admitted misusing his own charitable foundation's money. He was ordered to pay $2 million. You really want the American people to believe that this guy cares about corruption?
I do. I mean, you take him at his own word, what he said.
Look at the record.
That's what I'm saying, is look at the record. And when you're talking about impeachable offenses, okay, we did a 14-hour hearing last week. They had all these hearings down in the basement. They haven't presented any direct evidence to show that the president was involved in any crime. Now, you were talking earlier about the 3 previous impeachments in American history. In each one of those, there were specific criminal acts that there was a mountains of evidence to prove had been committed. We don't have that here. And our ultimate concern, Jake, is that the founders are very specific in warning against a single-party impeachment because they knew that it would divide the country. They knew that people would go to their corners, and it may be irreparable damage to the republic.
You know this as a historian, amateur historian, that they didn't want parties at all. I mean, they were very
Washington warned against it in his farewell.
Yeah, but they didn't want. But you talk about witnesses. Gordon Sondland testified before Congress about the big question: was there a quid pro quo? Did the Ukrainians have to make announcements of these investigations, political investigations? Ones that indisputably would help the president politically, whatever the reason behind them. Political investigations in exchange for a meeting with the president, which Zelensky desperately wanted to show the Ukrainians he was serious and to show the Russians he was serious. Here's Gordon Sondland making that point before the House Intelligence Committee.
Was there a quid pro quo? As I testified previously, with regard to the requested White House call and the White House meeting, the answer is yes.
That's a first-person witness. He had conversations with President Trump. There was a quid pro quo, he said.
Right, but the rest of the context, again, is that is based on his conjecture, speculation, his assumption, right? The direct evidence in the record is he said he asked the president on the telephone September 9th, I think it was, what do you want from Ukraine? The president famously said, I want nothing. I want no quid pro quo. I want Zelensky to do the right thing. Again, he wanted to ensure that Zelensky would be the reformer to clean that up so that if we're going to spend our precious taxpayer dollars over there, they're going to be spent well. And of course, the aid did go forward. There's never been an investigation.
After the whistleblower came forward, the aid was released. And yes, President Trump, according to Gordon Sondland, did say, no quid pro quo, no quid pro quo. I don't want anything from Zelensky. This is after it had been raised in public whether or not this was a quid pro quo.
Seeking to clarify that. Yeah.
And then Sondland was asked, and this is not as noticed, he was asked, did you believe President Trump? Let's roll that sound.
And you believe the president, correct?
You know what? I'm not going to characterize whether I believed or didn't believe. I was just trying to convey what he said on the phone.
Seems like it would be a pretty simple answer if he believed that President Trump actually meant it.
Well, it should, and maybe he should have answered it directly, but, you know, we have Sondland's testimony. What we said in the House Judiciary Committee was you have to take the full Sondland. You have to take all Sondland. You have to take little pieces of it, right?
I'm taking the full Sondland.
And the only direct evidence about the president's mens rea, his intent, is what he said on that phone call, the one that I just quoted to you. And that's the problem that the Democrats had. They promised an impeachment by Christmas, and that's why we're having this conversation right now. What they should have done is, for example, in the Obstruction of Congress article, they should have just gone to the third branch of the government, the judiciary. That's how it's always been resolved. When you have an impasse between the legislative and judicial branch and executive branches, you go to the third branch and you get it resolved. They didn't have time for that.
If there is nothing there, if it's all innocent, if all the information that Mulvaney, who has already also said that there was a quid pro quo, military aid held back in part for this investigation into this wild conspiracy theory that you've never espoused about Ukraine interfering in the 2016 election, if there was nothing there, why not just let Mulvaney come forward? Why not just let John Bolton come forward? Why even fight it if it's all innocent, like you said?
I'll tell you why. Because Adam Schiff engineered this process in the basement, this totally unprecedented, what we call a fraudulent process. He was having secret hearings in the basement. Look, I'm the
Which Republicans participated in.
No, but not the ones with jurisdiction. I'm on House Judiciary. We're the committee with jurisdiction. I'm the ranking member of the Constitution Subcommittee. As we sit here this afternoon, I'm still not privy to all the evidence they gathered in that basement. Why is that?
Because you're not on the Intelligence Committee?
Right, but that is the relevant...
That's an important point.
But that's the relevant evidence that they're bringing forward supposedly to justify an impeachment. This is an unprecedented process. The president did not want to submit to a fishing expedition, and by the way, all previous administrations took the same position. Barack Obama, during the Fast and Furious investigation, he didn't submit everything Congress asked.
Not everything, but he submitted some documents. This president has submitted no documents, literally zero.
Actually, not true. When the impeachment investigation began, they submitted 100,000 documents. He's had 25 members of his administration testify before the Intel Committee, Oversight Committee, this Congress. This year, he's had 20 in Judiciary. I mean, he has wanted to cooperate, but when it came to this issue, and when Democrats like Adam Schiff went out and telegraphed what they were going to do, and by the way, 95 House Democrats voted to impeach the president before July of this year, before any of the facts that you and I are talking about even developed. It was already decided. They predetermined this political outcome.
Oh,
so this was clear to the president. Why would you wouldn't have submitted to that.
We could probably talk for another hour.
We could.
Congressman Mike Johnson, it's good to see you again.
too.
Thank you so much for being here. If I don't see you, Merry Christmas.
You too.